The aliens trap the girl in a tank that's quickly filling with water. 16-year-old Liberty Wells is a shy, introverted girl with a passion for archaeology. She's just spent her summer at camp, where she preferred reading to socializing with her peers. When the camp ends, her mom Michelle picks her up. Michelle, a writer facing a rough patch in her career, is lively and cheerful, quite the opposite of her serious daughter. As they drive home, Michelle tries to chat with Libby about her time at camp, even asking if any boys caught her eye. Libby, annoyed by the questions, gives short, reluctant answers without looking up from her book. In an attempt to lighten the mood, Michelle turns on the radio and sings along to a silly song. She confesses she missed Libby, and Libby, while briefly looking up, admits she missed her too before going back to her book. After a while, Michelle pulls over and suggests Libby take the wheel. Libby reminds her that she doesn't have a license, but eventually agrees to drive. As they near their lake house, Libby spots a for sale sign and is so surprised she nearly loses control of the car. Michelle explains that she's selling one of their lots to help pay for Libby's college. Libby then notices an expensive watch on her mother's wrist, which doesn't exactly match their supposed financial troubles. Michelle admits it was a gift from her new boyfriend, who she wants Libby to meet soon. They arrive at the house and Libby spots an attractive young man named John emerging from the water, unable to take her eyes off him. John greets Libby warmly and reassures her that he won't intrude on her time with her mother. Once John is out of earshot, Libby asks Michelle why she hadn't mentioned him before. Michelle admits she wasn't sure their relationship would last. John then presents Libby with a small box containing an antique piece of jewelry. Knowing about Libby's interest in archaeology, he chose a bracelet with a Navajo life stone, a symbol of fertility. Libby is touched by John's thoughtfulness. Normally someone who prefers loose, baggy clothes, she decides to wear a beautiful open dress and comes downstairs to the kitchen in it. At lunch, Libby asks how Michelle and John met. Michelle explains that she arrived home earlier than usual and found John, a freshwater geneticist studying various organisms in the lake. Intrigued, Libby asks John about his work. He tells her he specializes in freshwater species and is focused on addressing freshwater pollution. Due to global warming, there's less rainfall to replenish Earth's freshwater reserves, and ocean evaporation is turning the remaining freshwater salty. This has led to a decline in many species. John and his team are working on helping these species adapt to saltwater conditions so they can survive. So basically, he's saving the world. Suddenly, John is seized by a severe coughing fit and gets up from the table. Worried, Michelle rushes to him, and he hugs her while discreetly touching Libby's bare shoulder with his other hand, making her feel uneasy. Later that night, Libby lies in bed thinking about John. She decides to get a drink from the kitchen. On her way back to her room, she hears disturbing noises, cries, and moans coming from Michelle and John's bedroom. Libby cautiously approaches the door, but hears a sound and quickly retreats to her room, diving under the covers. At that moment, John, who is naked, exits the bedroom. After getting a drink of water in the kitchen, he pauses at Libby's door and watches her, mistaking her for being asleep. The next morning, Libby sees Michelle and John kissing in the kitchen. Feeling jealous, she deliberately interrupts them by walking in. Libby reminds Michelle that today is a special day, the time for their tradition of placing small tokens and notes for themselves and their deceased loved ones into boxes buried in the yard each year. Libby suggests adding something to the box for her grandfather, who passed away 9 years ago, but Michelle declines. This upsets Libby, who had a deep bond with her grandfather, unlike her mother who didn't get along with him. Libby points out that Michelle had always seemed indifferent to him, which is why he left the lake house to her. Overwhelmed by her daughter's accusations, Michelle finally admits that her father never loved her and completely abandoned her during the divorce. Michelle then returns to the house, and Libby walks by the lake. While trying to lift a rock, she gets bitten by a centipede. She is about to crush it in frustration, but John appears and stops her. John explains that it's a rare species and shows that the centipede was only defending its offspring. He examines the bite, saying that centipedes are poisonous. Then he gently takes Libby's hand and blows on the wound, which makes her feel even more self-conscious. "Looks like you're going to be okay." John notices that Michelle seems upset and offers to leave if he's causing any trouble. Libby asks him if he truly loves her mother and convinces him to stay. Back at the house, Libby finds Michelle looking unwell. She apologizes to her mother for her past grievances about Grandpa, and Michelle reveals that John proposed to her and she accepted. Michelle confesses that she loves him deeply but wants to make sure Libby is okay with their marriage. Libby is taken aback by the news, but she finds the strength to be happy for her mother and wishes her well. Michelle hugs her daughter warmly and then nervously warns her that John doesn't know her real age. He thinks she's around 35 when she's actually 42. Michelle asks Libby not to tell him, fearing it might jeopardize their relationship. Later that day, Libby accidentally catches John drinking his own sweat, which alarms her. Curious and concerned, she decides to explore the basement where John has set up a laboratory, hoping to learn more about him. In the basement, John meets Libby and shows her his research on lamprey, ancient parasites that can live in both fresh and salt water. He speaks with fascination about these creepy creatures, which surprises Libby. "You're kind of a weird dude." John offers to help Libby catch new samples, and she agrees. At the lake, Libby asks John about his age and education. He tells her he's 30 and went to a small private school. Libby shares her plans to apply to Cambridge and mentions that she'll be giving a graduation speech for her academic achievements. She hasn't told her mother about applying because she doesn't want her to worry about her being so far away. John is impressed by her success and promises to keep her secret. Suddenly, Libby starts her period and the water in the boat turns red. John quickly grabs his shirt and places it between her legs. His actions shock Libby, and he apologizes for his abrupt behavior. He reassures her that nothing serious has happened, and then licks the red liquid off his fingers, which horrifies her even more. When they return to shore, Libby goes to take a shower. As she removes the bracelet John gave her, she notices a large red mark on her wrist from it. Suddenly, John enters the bathroom. He asks if she's okay but doesn't leave immediately. Instead, he starts sniffing her clothes and takes the shirt he used earlier. Libby becomes increasingly suspicious of John. Concerned, she tries to call her friend Marley to tell her what happened, but Marley doesn't answer. Libby then texts her, saying that her mother is marrying someone strange and asks her to come over. Later that evening, Libby finds a sandwich with a note from John under her door. He apologizes for the earlier incident and assures her it won't happen again. Libby returns to her room and, looking out the window, sees a strange orange light coming from the lake and watches as John walks into the water toward the light. Libby rushes out of the house, but by the time she reaches the lake the light has vanished, and John suddenly appears behind her. She tells him she saw him enter the water, but John insists it's impossible since his clothes are dry. He explains that he suffers from sleepwalking and doesn't remember how he ended up outside. Despite his apology, Libby is skeptical and points out that if he were truly sleepwalking, he wouldn't have closed the front door behind him. The next day, Michelle's condition worsens and she asks Libby to go into town to get some medicine and a pregnancy test. At the pharmacy, Libby gathers everything she needs and spots John outside with another woman. Panicked, she runs out to follow them, but the pharmacist catches up with her, reminding her that she hasn't paid for her items. Distracted, Libby loses sight of John and the woman. When Libby returns home, Marley is already waiting for her in the living room. Libby asks her to wait while she checks on her mother, only to find John with Michelle. She gives her mother the medicine and hesitates about mentioning the pregnancy test with John present, but he reassures her that he and Michelle have already discussed it. Libby offers to help with anything else, but John says he'll stay with Michelle and tells Libby to go back to her friend, noting that she's pretty cool. Back with Marley, Libby explains John's strange behavior and the incident on the boat. Marley, concerned, advises Libby to tell her mother everything. Libby, however, feels it might be pointless since her mother seems obsessed with John. So Marley decides to take matters into her own hands and plans to tell Michelle about what happened herself. "He grabbed you while you were bleeding." Libby wakes up in her bed, confused about how she ended up there. She heads to the living room and finds her mom and John snuggled up on the couch, watching TV. She asks why they didn't wake her when Marley left, and Michelle says she was out like a light. Out of nowhere, Michelle casually announces that she's pregnant and asks Libby to be supportive. Libby wants to know if Marley said something, and Michelle gets defensive, blaming Libby for talking to her friend about it. She insists John didn't do anything wrong, even though he apologized. Libby argues that John's behavior was off, but Michelle is upset, claiming that Libby always messes things up. She insists that John is staying and even demands an apology from Libby. John tries to calm things down, reassuring that everything is fine. As John hugs Michelle, Libby loses it and tries to pull her mother away, which leads to Michelle slapping her. In the heat of the moment, Libby reveals that Michelle is actually 42, not 35. John is shocked, his face turns red, and he rushes out of the house. Michelle is furious and asks Libby why she has a problem with John. She insists that John loves her quirks and all, and she's not leaving him. Later that night, Libby hears strange noises coming from the roof. She checks outside but finds nothing. When she goes back inside, she hears shouting from the bedroom. Peeking through the door, she sees them in the middle of making love and notices something odd with John's back. Terrified, Libby spots the eerie glow in the water again. It vanishes quickly, prompting her to wade into the lake. Finding nothing, she drives around to the other side of the lake. As she shines her headlights on the water, she spots something that looks like an alien spacecraft and hurriedly heads back home. She tries to tell her mother about what she saw but can't find her anywhere. Panicked, Libby goes down to the basement and is horrified to discover her mother tied up and submerged in water, her up to her waist. Libby struggles to free Michelle, and as she does, Michelle realizes that Libby was right about John. But it's too late for her to be saved. Suddenly, Libby hears John's footsteps and hides. Hearing cautiously, she confirms that John is not human, but some kind of alien creature. The floor is covered with salt water, and John's alien feet can't walk on it. His research on surviving in salt and fresh water was for his kind, not for Earth's conditions. In a human disguise and wearing rubber boots, John approaches the tank where Michelle is and waits for the creature he expects to be born. However, when he sees the newborn creature, his disappointment is clear. He takes the creature outside and then swallows something. Libby locks the basement door and rushes back to free her mother. She tries to call the police, but her calls don't go through. Suddenly, John appears at the window, trying to convince Libby that he wants to help her mother. Libby notices a device blocking the signal and smashes it, finally getting through to the police to report that John is a threat. While she waits for help, Libby scans the room and sees Marley's lifeless body floating in the water. John manages to break back into the basement, grabs Libby by the throat, and reveals his alien tongue. In a desperate move, Libby spots a bucket of salt nearby and tips it over onto John. He writhes in pain as the salt burns his alien skin. Seizing the opportunity, Libby rushes back to her mother and manages to pull her out of the tank. They escape the house but are soon attacked by something or someone. After some time, Libby regains consciousness, bound in a strange room. She sees several men in front of her who look just like John. It dawns on her that the man she saw in town was likely an alien too, using women to sustain his species. The alien creatures start tearing down the walls, and John approaches Libby, saying they don't have much time. Out of nowhere, he expels a glowing orb from his mouth and transfers it to Libby's mouth. She tries to fight back, but John forces her to swallow the orb. As soon as she swallows it, she loses consciousness. Libby wakes up again, this time in a diamond-shaped tank filling rapidly with water. She's horrified to see other women in similar tanks, realizing that the aliens plan to use them to propagate their species. What do you think? How did these extraterrestrial beings end up on Earth, and why do they need offspring from earthly women for their survival? Share your thoughts